I heard this gentleman on the Josh Monday Christian Conspiracy podcast, and I was just blown away by his episode. He's also an author of a book called Snatched from the Flames. He has a pretty wild life story and has really been through a lot, but has a very powerful testimony and faith to Jesus Christ and the saving grace of our loving Father in heaven. And without any further ado, folks, I'd like to introduce you to the author, ex-United States Army veteran, and just an overall good guy, man, Nathan Reynolds. Why don't you go ahead and say what's up to the Firmamentalists out there?
How's it going, y'all? Thank you so much, you guys, for taking the time to have me on here tonight. It has been a wild journey to get here, but I really appreciate you taking the time to have me and host so many other guests. You guys are fired up and passionate for the truth, and I know it's creating a big hunger for a lot of folks out there today.
Yeah, for sure. So just go ahead and let them know a little bit about yourself. Like I said, I heard you on the Josh Monday Christian Conspiracy podcast. And then from there, I found your audio book on Spotify. And I've been consuming that while I'm at work. And I just got to tell you, man, you're a tremendous writer. I love your writing style. And obviously, it's self-narrated because I can recognize the voice. But just go ahead and tell them a little bit about your book, what inspired it, and just a little bit about your journey to faith. And, I know you've had a very wild upbringing, to say the least. So go ahead and let the listeners know a little bit about yourself and what inspired this book and a little bit about your journey to the faith.
Well, so much of what inspired my book was really coming to grips with an understanding that the life that I had lived was vastly different than the life that my wife had lived. I married this woman and she got to know me as a very different person than the depths of who I really was, on a sense. She got to know half of me. And the other half of me, I'd really committed my whole life to trying to bury this man in the mirror and just try to put him to death. I never wanted to look at what I'd been through, what I'd gone through, and what I'd done. And I just wanted to just move on from it. And I never wanted to have to look it in the face. But we did this really dangerous thing when we were first married, and we turned off our TV and we started talking to each other. And we like actually began to like have a relationship, kind of like when you were dating and it was all like lovey-dovey. Like Raul was talking about the beginning of my book, which is like this beautiful love story, talking about how I met my wife and how we got to know each other. And I put her in the friend zone because I thought she was so far out of my league and I never had a chance with her. And but there was lots of miscommunications and it was just a train wreck and I was totally screwing it all up. But as we got to know each other, like you get married and some of that starts to wear off and you start to just become like ships passing in the night, working jobs and trying to grind away at the debt bomb that we were trapped in, that rat race. And so we just were stuck in that, and we suddenly turned off the TV and started talking about what her life was like growing up. And I started sharing some of the stories about what mine was like. And I began to see this absolutely arresting disparity between what she had known as normal and what I had thought was normal. And I think the reality is there's a lot of people today who have no idea the level of insanity of their past, because to them, it literally was so normalized that they never saw it as abusive. They never saw it as perverse. They never saw it as corrupt. And so instead, they've gone along their entire life assuming that's what love is, assuming that's what family is, assuming that's what friendship, faith, church, like they think that's normal. And so for as long as you're stuck in that normalcy bias, you can't see from the outside in how jacked up that situation was, how utterly detestable what you went through really was. But as we began to unravel some of these, unrealistic, impossible horrors of what I had gone through, it began to become readily apparent that what I had experienced was so diabolically evil that it should have never taken place. And really the level of depravity that I had gone through was something that can only be described as radical, intelligent evil. My family were practitioners of a very split world where on one side of the equation, they looked like a normal Christian family. And on the other side of the equation, they were passing their children through the fires. And I'm not just talking about some kind of like ethereal horror movie thing. I'm talking about like an old religion where people genuinely believe that access to power comes through the sell, the transportation, the trafficking, and the exploitation of their children. My family practiced this old religion, this ancient snake brotherhood that believed Quetzalcoatl, believed these plumed serpents, these fiery dragons really still live. They occupy time and space on this in this world, and that they can be summoned and called upon for gifts of fortune, divination, for foretelling, to give them access to power. They had to call upon these mighty ones, call upon these gods. And the way they did that in my family, they practiced this generational incest. They practiced this form of abuse where they would sell their children to the grandfathers. It wasn't necessarily that the children themselves were abused by their dads, but it seemed to be absolutely intimately connected with them and the grandfathers. And so my mother's dad, she he would he was part of the Knights of Columbus down in a city called Lake Havasu City, Arizona. And that city was really founded by a man named Robert P. McCulloch and C.V. Wood. C.V. Wood was the guy who built and the engineer of Disneyland. And back in the 1960s, they wanted to create another pleasure park out in the deserts of Arizona. And really, they designed the city from its foundation to be a sovereign territory for the city of London, to have a pleasure island. People have this more common discussion about Jeffrey Epstein's, his pleasure island, but really the elites in different ways have had these islands of sovereign territory for generations, for eons. And so these territories will be built and established. And what they did in Lake Havasu is they established a city for retirees, for older folks to be able to have access to children on a regular basis. So it was catered as like, a family affair that, grandparents could have their sons and their grandsons hang out with them. And there was a lot of plausible deniability about why a bunch of old men were around a lot of little boys all the time. And so the pleasure island was built as they carved out an island in Lake Havasu where the Colorado River dumps into, and they brought the London Bridge over from the city of London, the actual London Bridge over. And when they were bringing that bridge over here, so many people have heard this song throughout their life, this London Bridge is falling down, is falling down, this little nursery rhyme that was sung because people understood that you had to sacrifice your children into the stones of the London Bridge. It's called immurement. This has been a divine rite that's been practiced for thousands of years, going all the way back to Jericho. This is what imbued these walls, these stones, with such power and such decadence, was their ability to hold a spiritual charge inside them. And even when they're bringing that bridge over here, the modern historians of this, you can go to the Lake Havasu City Museum there, the London Bridge Museum. They'll tell you that they discovered 80 bodies inside the stone foundations of that bridge, 5 of which were children. And so still to this day, inside that bridge, there's hollowed out cavities that they created to have satanic rituals in. And I say satanic a little bit loosely here because the specific deities that they worshiping, they would never call themselves Satanists. And so this is a really important phrase, because there's a junk door term that people will call satanic ritual abuse. And that's one way of articulating it. However, these people take offense to ignorance. I'll just put it super transparently. They find it absolutely detestable that people are ignorant to the specifics of which mighty one, which God they're worshiping. Some people absolutely are committed to a form of Satanism. Others are committed to a form of, Luciferianism, but others are very devoted to a serpent cult. And that's what these Knights of Columbus members and these Jesuits down there in Lake Havasu City were all about. These were these brotherhoods of the snake. And they really believed that by bringing their children into their grandchildren into these rituals, that they would offer up these sons through sexual abuse, through torture, through anguish, and offer up their blood, and these deities would manifest themselves. They would conjure them up, and they would be present there. And during that ritual, they would impart to them foretelling, a version of future telling, and they would give them this power and this control and this communication. And so I was traumatized and abused down there on a regular basis throughout my life. And for me, that's what family was. That's what safety was. That's what normal was. And so for so long in my life, I got conditioned through this just shattering of my mind, this splitting of my soul, and this intentional destruction of my identity, so that I had this multiple personalities. On one side, I was bonded through this trauma to my abusers. And on the other side, I was bonded to my family that lived a normal life. And so it created a very split life for me. And I was consumed with this inescapable level of pain and suffering and rage on one side that didn't have any outlet for a lot of years of my life. And then slowly and incrementally, they began grooming me so that they would give me an opportunity to get out of it, to fight back, to lash out and leash out that rage at enemies, at targets that they would direct me at. And so this turned into a real life of chronic violence. It turned into a life of bloodshed for me, where I began to go out and seek the destruction, seek the death of these people that I believed with everything in me were pedophiles, were perverts, were the destroyers of the innocence of others. And so I began to go out and be released to go hunt these people down and commit assassination, covert killings on them, to cut off their fingers and cut out their tongues because they were speaking the oaths and betraying the brotherhood. And so for many of the years of my life in my youth, this is what consumed me and led me into a life with the United States military, where I began to do wet work for them. And I was only ever caught up in this violence and this self-hatred for so many years of my life. But it was into the midst of that the Father began to truly orchestrate a path of deliverance for me out of it.
So, wet work, I'm not too familiar with that term. Can you explain what that is to me?
Yeah, wet work is a form of killing other individuals that you are sent after targets. You could say assassination, but really it's just killing other people. Mercenary work.
Okay.
These are different phrases.
So mercenary work. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but more so specifically just targeting, killing people. There's a lot of other mercenary work that's bodyguarding. There's others that's VIP asset transportation, but this is specifically just I had an obsession with just being participant in the killing blow. I wanted to be able to seek the death of these bad guys in my perspective.
Were
yeah.
your
So
were
you
your parents in on this, Nathan? Like, did they know about this?
You know, on one side of it, it's like the family secret. No questions about it. This is the family business. Like my father, later on in my life, sold my body to his grandfather. And he moved him into our house in Arizona when I was around 9 years old, and he sold me for the family inheritance. And the Reynolds family has sizable wealth and influence, and the main power that the Reynolds family has is on my side of the family. They are procurers of blackmail. They make their money through what's called black gold. So they traffic in humans and drugs and body products from all of this bloodletting process that takes place in there. There's a lot of products that people use during rituals and rites, and drugs pharmaceutical companies will use to render down into different pharmaceutical products. And my family would
wow.
sell and traffic in these objects. But my dad was absolutely committed to building his little empire. And so when he sold me to my great grandfather, he became my constant abuser and lived in the house with me. And so that's when my dad was able to have access to the trust fund, for lack of other words, bought a plane and houses and cars, and just kind of had his lifestyle then. And my body was the price that was paid into the coffers for them to have their kingdom.
So you have brothers and sisters, correct?
I have two sisters. I have two older sisters.
Two sisters. So these experiences started around the age of 9.
No, they started as early as I can remember.
Oh wow. But that's the age when your grandpa was actually living with you.
Yeah. They moved in. We moved to a town called Pine Top Sholo Lakeside up in the White Mountains of Arizona. And that was really to have access
Yeah.
to the White Mountain Apache Reservation, because there's a whole other level to this, that when you want to get into like skinwalker and stuff that the Dene people do out there, and there's some real dark magic that are used for a lot of rites and rituals, and that was part of this cult. Kind of moved up into the high mountains. These people are obsessed with high mountain, like high places. You read about this in the scriptures. It's not some kind
Yeah.
of like ethereal thing. They go to the desert places where these demons and these spirits dwell. They go to Death Valley where death reigns, and then they go up to the high places. They're seasonal like snowbirds, and they travel to these places based off of these equinoxes. At least my cult did. Different cults have all kinds of different practices. It's like they all have a phone book that they're trying to call these spirits and talk to these fallen Rephaim and these Nephilim spirits, and this is how they do it.
Yeah.
And so they've got a recipe of when they go to do that. So there's these sacred mountains. That's what, if you track where these sacred mountains are and these sacred valleys are, that's where these cults would go in and follow after the First Nations people into their rites and ritual places and defile them there.
Wow. Yeah, I'm actually very familiar. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I live in New Mexico, traveled back and forth. So I've traveled through all those areas. And I know that Northern Arizona has a lot, like, Sedona's very, new age, very heavy Masonic influence in that town. There's just weird spiritual energy, right, all over the place, crystal shops and all these alternative, magic stores. And it's you can tell there's definitely that undertone of those spirits. And even the White Mountains in Arizona that you speak of, one of the things too that pops in my mind too is that's where that gentleman that they did the movie Fire in the Sky, where they had those experiences with those supposed extraterrestrials, but I think they're demons, right? So yeah, that whole area, and just even talking about the native culture, it's kind of the same thing in northern New Mexico, just a very high spiritual energy. And I've heard the stories of the serpents, and window rock and all this stuff. So I'm familiar with what you're talking about.
The
Nathan,
man,
were
you
your
hit it dead on the
sisters?
head with those Ophanum, man. Like it talks about in Ezekiel 1, these wheels within spirits within the wheels, these like orbs that people see that manifest during a lot of these spiritual encounters. And these so many when there's blood spilled, this creates a doorway that's open perpetually. Like when Abimelech like slaughtered all of the brothers of all of his brothers, 70 of his brothers on one stone, that's like charging an object, and when you do that, you create a rift in the spiritual realm that stays open. That blood perpetually cries out, it demands justice, and that's like literally leaving a massive spiritual door open. And so what happened is all of these rites and these rituals that these families had been practicing, these generational occultists had been practicing in Arizona, left all these gateways open. And what happens is it's like what you're describing there in Sedona and so many of these other places, like this Semiramis cult that came in there, these people that are all this goddess Inanna worship that have come in almost
Mm-hmm.
second to the fact, because the veil has been rent there. They have already spilled the blood in so many of these places that these spirits and their celestial hosts are coming in and invading these territories. And so you have those that are on that quest for kind of their spiritual encounters, not understanding that what they're dealing with is masquerading spirits, that are going to go ahead and play to the light side now that they've kind of had their fill with the darkness. And so that's exactly what you steep down in there. The other side of it, you guys, if you're not aware, if the largest, one of the most expensive scientific projects that's ever been endeavored by the United States Navy is also there outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, which is the Naval Research Interferometer. It's one of the largest telescopes in a sense. It's got these 3 mile long tracks that these various telescopes use to look at and match and track alongside with these, when they're looking up at the celestial bodies and they're communicating back and forth with these beings up there. That is right there outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. And that is one of the most really sacred territories in that land for being able to observe and communicate with those little entities in the sky.
So, like,
Yeah, it's
I was gonna say, so are you saying like the stars are celestial beings, like Nephilim, or?
No, man, I don't think that they're Nephilim. I think they're a different class of spiritual beings entirely. Like it says, like the shining ones. Like they are specifically a different class of entity. I think some of them, like it says in the book of Jude, they're wandering stars with whom the
yeah.
darkness of blackness is reserved forever. So those that are wandering are clearly the ones that I think more and less that are the most intent to communicate back and forth with. But the other ones are definitely thrones and powers, and they have a capacity to communicate in their own way. That's why I think so much of, hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars gets invested into doing that. There's another research station down there that the Vatican controls as well, which is on this most sacred site to the Apache Indian as well, which has the Lucifer Project telescope and these other ones. And
Yep.
Arizona is a
Mount
serious place for
Graham. Yeah.
communicating with the hype ones.
Well,
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. That's in Mount Graham,
Mount
right?
Graham. Yeah, Mount Graham.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's crazy because I remember going to I've been to Sedona a few times and stayed out there, and I remember even in seeing that they were advertising UFO watch parties where they claim that they will take you out on these jeep rides to the high deserts, and they summon these UFOs. And I've had a handful of UFO experiences in northern New Mexico, and pretty intense ones, by the way. And that's another reason why I don't question Jesus and the authority that his name has over spirits on earth and in heaven. Because when I prayed in his name, this thing broke apart and flew away from us. It was a pretty terrifying experience, but I'm with you. Like, I think that definitely the Bible says that these stars are celestial bodies, right? They're angels, they're angelic spirits. And to me, like, obviously the Nephilim were the hybrids of angels and human beings, right? That were wiped out during the flood, and now they're cursed to roam the body as disembodied spirits. But then you also have the fallen angels, which are separate from them, which are, I believe, inside of the earth and have been in communication with world governments for a long time. I think they've been working with these demonic forces. And these are my humble opinions, but you know, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that would point to this stuff being real. and for them being invested in human beings and our genetics. And I think that's also what transhumanism is all about, you know, giving these disembodied spirits vessels to inhabit.
They absolutely need different hosts, you know. It's like there was so much of the obsession with this consumption of blood and consumption of these bodily fluids is because they need an energy source. They are unplugged from El Shaddai. They're unplugged from the Most High. They have to regenerate themselves, and especially when they're on this realm, it's very costly for them. It's very like a heavy burden when they're in our atmosphere and in this place. That's why they are roaming about inside the earth. They occupy under the ground for a reason, because it's an extreme strain upon them to be physically up here in our atmosphere. The sun is genuinely toxic to them. Like, it's not some kind of like vampire movie myth thing. Like, these things are like a parasite that is experiencing death when they're out here. And so they need, like it says from the very beginning, the serpent, the great red dragon, was cursed from the beginning to eat dust, and mankind is dust.
Yep.
That's why they eat our blood. They need us to live. That's why they are a parasitic relationship. And so, like, when they're drinking this blood and they're exchanging these materials, they're literally living off of us and they're feeding off of us. They need us on one side of it to be able to live and to function, to be their physical bodies, their hands, their feet, whether they're the Nephilim, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, like you talked about, those spirits that need it. They're always hungry. They're always filled with lust and never able to be satisfied. But then there's these other classes like Ophanim and Seraphim and Cherubim. There's these other classes of immortals that fell and rebelled as well, and they don't need a body in the same way. So they procure and they enact their will on this earth in a different form, in a different fashion. And so even outside of Flagstaff, Arizona is Meteor Crater, Arizona, and I do not believe that was caused by a meteor. I believe that's one of
No.
those mighty ones coming up from out of the earth, you know. And this is what some of them
Bubble
believe, that this
exploding.
is when death literally came out onto the earth, and when these fallen angels got released from their chains in Tartarus, and they're allowed to set forth their agenda. And you see this massive unleashing of all these agendas back in the 1800s, and we're experiencing what it is to battle with these entities, like in the days of Lamech and Methuselah. You know, we're not the first believers to try to contend against this radical depravity, but we are having to deprogram ourselves from the deceits and the lies that we all experienced growing up about it.
Yeah, man, that's amazingly deep stuff, and I'm with you on that too with the meteor crater thing. And you're talking to a couple of guys that are flat earthers, but I like to call it level plane geocentrism. But yeah, I don't think that was caused by a meteor, man. It could be like a giant bubble exploding from underneath the earth, like you said. You know what I mean? So back to kind of like, you know, some of your experiences as a child, you know, and then you're going through this. So at what age do they stop, um, you know, using you as, you know, for these rituals, this sex magic, this blood magic? At what age are you no longer good, and then they transition you into like preparing you for this life of becoming a hitman for them, right? You said that they would use you, they used that anger that was inside of you, and they could channel it and direct you to, you know, to perform these acts of violence against people that broke these oaths. So what was that transition there from actually being a part of these rituals, and then now you're older and they don't want you for those, so they kind of redirect your course, like?
Well, a lot of that, I mean, in their ideology, it's that the child before the age of 9, a boy before the age of 9, is like the best battery bank, if that makes sense. There's like a purest form of power that exists in a child from their innocence. I really believe is where that comes from. And the fixation generally is before that age. And so a lot of times you'll see the major systemic abuse starting between 3 years old and 6 years old. And then they'll go through it. Like, for me, that's when a lot of it, like, it heightened to its worst, you know, was between then and 9 years old. And by the time I got to my grandfather, I was kind of used up in a sense, and like passed over. You know, it's like you get passed on from that, and you finally are so desiccated in your identity. You're so confused about what is normal, and you're bonded to abusers. You know, you don't have, like, it's taken me so long to be able to understand what purity of love is from youth, from like children. I have 4 children now, you know, and to be able to see
Wow.
at these ages that my children have been, to be even imagine like for them to have free will. Like, that's why I'm out here, speaking the truth, is because I chose to say no to my family and not give them my daughter, because that's the access to the trust fund. Like, you want wealth and you want the phone book, the directory, so you can grow your empire. You got to give us legal guardian rights to your daughter, and that's how it works. And I knew what it was like to be unable to experience free will. I knew what it was like to lose free will at such a young age, that I wanted to give my children choice. I wanted to give them the gift that I never had, which was the ability to make a choice for myself, because I was so convoluted in a cult mentality where every relationship that I had around me was locked together. Like, there was a constant intricacy of the people that I was allowed to have access to went through similar experiences. So even if I talked about abuse like this, it was normalized. It was regular, and so it took me so long to realize how dark and how evil it really was, because I thought that's what you experience on family vacations. That's what you experience. That's what uncles do. This is how the family tree bears forth its fruit. And so it really wasn't until, like, at 6 years old, I was forced to participate in my first killing, but it was not the same as like an autonomous thing. It was not like, there was no aspect of the hunt participant in it. It was just an act of like revenge. It was just an act of like of pressure from a group sense. But it was really that grooming phase started. And once they identify, like, what are your primary motivators, what are the things that you have aptitudes, talents, and giftings for, that they then begin grooming you with different mentors. They would call them mentors, right? Or like family associates. They would just call them uncles or cousins, aunts. Everybody is literally called like a family member. So like, the reason I refer to it in my book as the family is like, in Italian, this is called mafia. Like, it's not, it's a deepest form of perversion about the idea of family to a normal person, but to somebody who's born into it, it is literally how families are. Like, I thought it's normal to go to your aunt's house and go to where they train German shepherds and then be sent out to try to sneak in and infiltrate the property and not get killed by the dogs. Like, to me, that's like normal 9-year-old summer vacation hangout stuff. Like, to me, it was like, that's like what you do. And like, it gets turned into a lot of like games. So like, it's not like big, bad, scary, horrible stuff all the time. You know what I mean? Like, some of it begins to get thrilling and exciting because you're getting the opportunity to go and do something. You're getting the opportunity to like make a difference. You think you're finally free to fight back. You think you're finally like, you're allowed out of the box. Like, you're muzzled your whole life. You're shoved in this cage, and all my talents and all of my like natural aptitudes were so suppressed that I was only ever allowed to go out and be me in a ferocious or intense way under the hunt. And so it became this like supercharging of excitement and like this like absolute release. All the rest of my life was pressure and control, but then there was this only directed freedom, was this outlet of killing. And so it just conditioned me for so long. And it's the same kind of pressures that get put on soldiers when they're taking them from civilian to trained murderer in a couple of weeks. You have to control every avenue of their mind and create these psychological war games so that it bonds to them in these deep trauma states, so that it comes out of them as a form of just automatic responses, automatic reactions.
Yeah. Wow. Um, I was going to ask, so, I mean, did you have any like regular friendships growing up? Like, did you have any kind of normalcy where, like, I mean, how did they maintain this facade with the community that you guys live in, that they were just this normal, Christian family, but they have all these really dark secrets, right? Were you able to have any interactions with regular kids? Did you have friends growing up, or did they kind of keep you isolated from even that kind of stuff?
Well, on one side, one of the main tactics I'd say is keeping the camouflage is being very, very friendly and volunteer oriented wherever they went. Like, outreach is like the best camouflage in some ways. When you get connected to churches, like, people are so volunteer driven and needy at a church, like in the form of institutional churchianity, I would say, that they're desperate for volunteers. They're desperate for people to be able to help out. And so my family was always very hospitable and always very helpful towards anybody when they would go into a new community. But on the other side of it, their main tactic for myself was constantly to move me or change schools. So like, I would have a form of, if like I had a destabilization is like the entire intricate, like the entire basis for mind control is destabilization. And so like, if I had a set like period of time, like from first grade to second grade and third grade. I changed schools and we changed towns multiple times. Even the course of a semester, I might change schools again. But if there was ever like a real deep bonding taking place between me and another friend, like that was shut down so quickly. It was very quickly shut down, and we would transfer schools. Or if I began to show like a real affinity towards a specific teacher, like where I was bonding and starting to share stuff with her, and then those parent teacher conferences kind of start where, some of my teachers saw stuff on me, like physical marks, especially between that 6 and 9 years old time frame. Like I changed my name. I stopped smiling. I changed my handwriting. Like I was very chaotic. I showed a lot of brilliance at school at times, where they were like, you should move him up a couple grades. My parents were absolutely against it. But then at another time, I was like as dumb as a box of rocks. And so some teachers, they are perceptive and they're able to cue in on this stuff, but generally the response is have a parent teacher meeting. And so as soon as that gets flagged, it's like you're going to change schools, and that's what would happen. So with a pretty constant rate in my life, we would just move cities and move houses and move schools. And so not even as many as my sisters. My sisters moved and changed schools a lot less. Like I don't have any recollection of my sisters going through any of this. I don't know what they experienced. I don't know what their version of life was like. I just know my family had this male cult obsession stuff. So I don't know what their experiences was. And a lot of times within cult families, they will only have what they call a chosen one. One of the children gets passed through this stuff to create a layer of plausible deniability so that the other children can be like, everything's normal. There was nothing crazy going on for us, but that's more just their experiences in there. And so I did start to have more substantive relationships later on in my life, but that wasn't until I was more in high school and I finally got a car and I started having a little more autonomy and having girlfriends and starting to open that avenue up. And that's where stuff started leaking out a lot more. I started drinking, and anytime I drink and get drunk, man, all this stuff would come pouring out of me. Just this horror show of sorrow and despair and depression. I mean, I was an absolute wreck when I would drink. And so it began to leak out a lot. And that's why I got emancipated to the United States government as a junior in high school, and I went in and kind of got sheltered into a totally different, for mind control cult.
Oh man, that's wild, dude. I wanted to ask you, being a father of 4 children now, like before your first child was born, were you I mean, you had to be nervous, man. At least I would think, like about, these things coming back to haunt you again. Or did you ever feel like what got you to the point where you're like embraced fatherhood and you were able to break those generational curses that had been passed down and stop the ritual abuse and stop that, from happening to your children, right? But I was going to ask you, were you scared at all? Not, I don't know if scared is the right word, but did you have any, you know, thoughts about before becoming a father about this stuff coming back to haunt you, or were you completely past that and delivered from it by God?
Man, I was absolutely terrified. I was absolutely terrified that I had no idea how to be a father. Like when I was really early on, like they did this thing where they crushed my epididymis so that I would be like a eunuch. It's this Catholic practice of making boys stay prepubescent for a long time. They've been practicing this for thousands of years, man, where they like choir boys to have a certain type of mannerism, and these people have an obsession with pedophilia, so that it's a way of keeping them prepubescent for a lot longer. And so I, on one side, didn't think I was ever going to be able to have children. I thought I was a eunuch for my life. And I had a lot of severe, extreme pain, like testicular pain early on in my marriage. And it was horrible. We were not able to conceive for 5 years. And my wife was just finally like, let's get you into a specialist to try to see if they can do some reversal to this. And so I did. I ended up having a surgery, and, about 10 months, not right away, but within the next year, my wife got pregnant. And for me, that was it, man. I have a picture in the book where she's holding that pregnancy stick, man. And I can't even describe to you how terrified I was when I was staring at that. I knew on one side, I was destined for fatherhood now, and it was irrevocable. Like that meant my Father in heaven actually believed in me, that I was capable of being a father, that he had a purpose and a destiny for me that was beyond what I had. I wanted to get out of, all I wanted to do was find a redoubt in the mountains and disappear with my wife. Like I knew there was an inevitable war coming. Like Denver, for those of you that don't know, by the way, I was living in Colorado at that point in my life. I'd separated from my family. It Not all the way, but I'd separated almost entirely from them. And Denver is like the capital of the New World Order. Like it is the epicenter to where so much of this is based in. That is literally like Boulder, Colorado is the home of the dragon's nest, where the timekeeper of the world is, the atomic clock is. And this place is centered as a hub for this activity. And so I was firmly planted right in the heat of that place. You can drive around the streets there and they literally say adopted by the Church of Satan, like all over the place. That is a hotbed for the demonic on a totally different realm than what most people are really aware of. And so like I knew that there was an inevitable war that was going to take place, and it was going to be centered around that area. And so like my position and preparations and practice and plans was just bugging out and disappearing into the woods. And I was just burying caches and getting copies of keys going up there. Like, I'm a trained covert agent and operative. I was just prepared to just disappear and put on different identities and never come out of this. And seeing her get pregnant, man, I knew there was a totally different war that I was going to have to fight, which was how do I get out of the generational stronghold of constant abuse? How do I break that cycle, first of all, for my children? And then how do I get out of this cult for my family? Because they don't exactly let you go. They kind of like, they're waiting, they're biding their time till they can get another opportunity to try to get their hands on you again and use you again. They're obsessed with merchandising their children. Like, I can't put that more strongly enough. The way that you would look at a business venture, for selling a car, is how they look at their business venture for selling their 7-year-old son. Like they literally look at their child and they think of how they can grow their empire through that child in a very sadomasochistic way. And so I knew that I had two options, man. I could give in and go along with it and get rich, like I've been waiting my whole life for, because they starve you like a dog. My family grew wealthy, but I didn't get to touch any of it. I didn't get to touch anything. I was so starved for wealth that I was waiting for my time to come. And by that point, that's why so many people give in and they give their children over, because they've watched other family members be rich and powerful for so long that they're desperate to have their chance. They're desperate to say, well, this is what I can do once I get the generational wealth. This is what I'll do with my empire, but I knew at the end of the day, either like the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was still true, was still trustworthy, still reliable, and still was the same yesterday, today, and forever, or he was not, and we were going to die. Like, because you can't stop these people. Like, you can't physically, carnally, you're not going to win. Like, you're not. They have armies of people. I've seen what a team of assassins can do to an arena of people. Like, there's no way you can stop this force. But I absolutely had seen, and I had experiences when I'd gone out to try to kill certain people. I had run into some kind of power, of a force that shut me down, that literally stopped the demonic presences of murder and rage. They paralyzed me from being able to go after a family that I was sent after when I was young. Like, I had experienced what I believed was a hedge of protection that stopped the demonic so viscerally that I could never proceed. And so I knew that this word could be trusted. And if I was willing to do whatever it takes to get my family away from these people, to sever all ties, to come out of that the Father would have my back. And if not, we would die, but I would at least die in confidence, knowing that I had fought for my children's protection rather than fought for their perversion.
Nathan, yeah. I was going to ask you how important bloodlines are, and is there a lot of like incestuous relationships and breeding that are taking place as well?
Well, I would just say specifically with some of these families, it's absolutely to be guarded. That the bloodline is imperative, and it's because I think there's a book that's written by Gary Wayne called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. I highly recommend that for any of you that are actually wanting to understand like what is the belief ideology of these people. Different families and different bloodlines hold to this practice and this right, that's divine right of incest, much higher standards, because they're trying to preserve the fidelity of their divine right to kingship. They believe that they are carriers of the seed of Christ on one side of it, and they are carriers of the seed all the way back to Solomon and to David, back to Nimrod, and then ultimately all the way back to the Son of Man. They believe that they hold that heraldry, and because of that, they have the divine right to raise up a Messiah, to raise up the seed of Christ, and which would be like an antichrist. And so that they push you through these. The reason they take their sons and they push them through these trials is to try to make them raise up this generational mighty one, this God. They're trying to raise up Nimrod, y'all. They're trying to raise up the spirit of Apollo and put it upon one of their sons so that he can reign over mankind. Like, they really are committed to this. It's not some kind of like storybook thing. They believe this wholeheartedly, and they intermarry with families to further deepen their bloodlines. This is no different. Like, we're so bereft of our history that even just a couple generations ago in Germany, there was hundreds of thousands of people who were inbreeding corporately to try to resurrect these old bloodlines and bring back these gods in Germany. Like, these are ideologies and ethos that run very deep cross-culturally across the world in different bloodlines. And my family had that same. On one side of it, I think I'm more of a bastard son to a much more powerful bloodline. So the desire for me to go procreate and preserve, that was not, they didn't have that intention or that drive for me. I wasn't raised up as a breeder. You know what I mean? Like, some men are raised up to be stock, and whereas other women are raised up to be stock, you know? And so it just depends on different families that you come from.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, see if you knew about this, but so Princess Di and her whole murder was the Black Swan murder, and it was a ritualistic murder, right? And I always was under the belief that the reason why was because she was breaking that royal bloodline and dating an Arab prince, right? And she was gonna, if she would, because they say that she was actually pregnant with a baby, right? So she was gonna break that bloodline, and she was coming out and she was talking about a lot of this. But they also, I watched a documentary where they explained that it was a sacrifice to Apollo, because that place where that she died was, they used to actually do child sacrifices to the spirit of Apollo on this hill. And it's crazy because she crashed into the 13th pillar in the tunnel, and everything about it was, screamed an occult murder, ritual murder, right? Are you familiar with that?
I have never researched Princess Diana's death. That's really fascinating here.
Yeah, man, you got to check it out. I actually did an episode with George Hobbs on the Fact Hunter, and we talked about that. I wish I had my notes with me so I could be more specific, but yeah, man.
It was a wild day.
Definitely.
That was my birthday that she died on. Just heads up.
Oh, oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing too, I'm also familiar with like Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, and the Babylon. They were trying to usher in a new era of Apollo, and they were into blood, sex, magic, and all that stuff. And these are some of the highest ranking people that in some of these highest ranking outfits in our country and around the world. And these people are practicing this stuff. It's wild.
It really is their absolute religion. You're describing Jack Parsons. For those of you who don't know, he's referring to the founder of Jet Propulsion Laboratories. Like, you want to talk about one of the biggest military defense contractors and some of the most powerful military industrialists on the earth. That is their origin story, and the Church of Scientology as well. These were the Babylon Moonchild ritual that they were working on based off of Aleister Crowley's book, The Moonchild. And they read these things and they live this out. Like, they have an obedience to their gods. They have an obedience to their scriptures and their sacred texts that puts a lot of believers to shame. Honestly, at the end of the day, like, there's a reason that it says the Father's going to spit these lukewarm people out of his mouth, because he's looking at, like, he'd rather us be hot or cold. And he's not kidding. He's literally saying, I'd rather you be all in for evil or all in for good. Like, he'd rather you be Balaam and Janus and Jambres contending black magicians fighting against Moses, than you to sit there on the sideline trying to debate, well, I'll just guess I'll wait and see which God is stronger. He wants us to be absolutely all in and committed to our cause, because at the end of the day, that's what is required. Like, I'm passionate about being a zealot. You know what I mean? There was 3 sects that were going on around the time of Jesus, Yeshua. Like there's the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Zealots. They get a lot less press coverage in the scriptures, but they were critical components. Yeshua recruits 2 of them to be his disciples in there, and these people, they were people that absolutely were diehard committed to guarding the commandments, and that anybody in resisting these powers, these governing rulers that were keeping them from walking in the path of obedience, from keeping them from guarding the Torah. Like they were willing to literally do whatever it took to try to protect the rights of the people to obey the commandments of God. They loved them, and they had this zealousness in them that made them willing to do anything. Like Phinehas, who rises up with a spear in the midst of the congregation to stop the plague when Baal Peor and Balaam with his seducing magic comes in and leads the people astray to commit fornication, with the gods of many holes. There's this constant pursuit of people that are intelligent and persuaded on how to lead the people into idolatry, who use that magic, who use that, you would say, weaponized psychology nowadays, that mass marketing and propaganda to engineer people's consent to break the law, to break the commandments, to sin and transgress and dilute their actual strength, to be weakened, and so that they are easily controlled and easily beguiled. And you know what? Like the preeminent camouflage that the kingdom of darkness has is people's ignorance of the devil's schemes. And that's why we're commanded, do not be ignorant of the schemes of the devil. Like we are supposed to have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, but we are rather to expose and reprove them. And when we fail, when we abdicate to do that, like the world is looking for answers. The world is looking for healing, help. They're looking for restoration. And, they should be able to turn to the hospitalers, the people that were supposed to have a hospital for the sick and the weary, the oppressed. Like they were supposed to be able to turn to the people that were the ones that cast demons out of people, the ones who had spiritual authority, that walked into the room and healed, they raised the dead. Like there was still a power that existed in the sons and daughters of Elohim that's still available to us. And we don't need to deny that by walking in ignorance, but we need to be sharpened in our swords of understanding so that we can engage with this kingdom of darkness wherever we find it, because it's insidiously sown itself into our schools, into our churches, into our police stations, into our political offices, into our businesses. And we need to absolutely have nothing to do with these oath-keeping societies, but we need to expose them. We need to corrupt them from their core.
Yeah, I think as well, and you kind of spoke upon it earlier too. You look at these groups, like the Shriners and the Masons. They on the outward, they make themselves out to be these philanthropist groups, right? That are doing good things, like Shriners with the Children's Hospital, but it's just a cover up for what is actually really going on, to keep people off the scent, And I'm with you, man. We battle powers and principalities in high places, and that's why I was really inspired to start this podcast, because originally when I was going to do a podcast, I was just going to do it on interview people about paranormal experiences, but it's not what God had intended for me. And I never got it launched off. And then being a guest on a couple other shows, it inspired me. George Hobbs actually talked to me and he's like, man, he's all, have you ever thought about doing your own podcast? You got a great voice. You got a lot of good information. He's like, I think you'd be a good podcaster. And when I prayed about it, and then God gave me the name Firmamental, and, it's become what it's become. But that's why I'm so passionate about it, is because I think it's important to expose these works of darkness. And I don't want to have to go stand before my Father on that day and have him ask me, I showed you all these things. I revealed these truths to you and you kept them to yourself. I think that we're watchmen and that we need to be sounding the horn, because I mean, the camp's been invaded, and we can't be asleep at the watchtower, otherwise the blood's on us as well. And that's why I feel so passionate about what we do on this show and talking about these things, because it's very important. And you're right, man. It is a complete assault on the nuclear family home. It's a complete assault on Yahshua, and his Holy Spirit. And we live in a day and time when these demonic forces are no longer hiding in darkness. A lot of the times they're masquerading in front of our faces, whether it's, this fiasco that's going on at the southern border. Because let's be honest, what it's really all about is human trafficking, and all these undocumented, children are just disappearing, and that's why, because they're undocumented. I think that's why they're allowing this stuff to go on. the feminization of men, demasculizing men. And it's just, it becomes blatantly apparent when you really start to evaluate and look at these things. And I think a lot of people woke up, it took a few years post pandemic, but, you know, that the enemy really overplayed their hand in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of people, even people that weren't necessarily conspiratorial minded, started to wake up and question things and be like, hold up, man, there's something really going on here. I think I should do a little bit of investigation, and especially when you see the control of information, right, by this hidden hand, when you see what's taboo, what you can and can't talk about, that's where it becomes blatantly apparent. And I think that's why it's so important that we talk about things on this show, because in a world that's so fake and so fabricated and our news is so controlled, people are going to alternate sources for information. And we want to be able to glorify the power of Yeshua. We want to be able to glorify the Holy Spirit and expose these works of darkness, because I think there's a lot of people out here that are asking these questions, and we got to be able to expose this stuff. And we got, like you said, we got to be on top of our game.
You absolutely got that right. My wife and I, we started doing this, like, we went and saw Russ Dizdar speak at this conference, and he had a topic that was called The Satanic Infiltration of the Church. And my wife, when she read the title of that, she was like, that's terrifying. And I was like, that's why you need to go. I was like baby stepping my wife into this stuff, y'all. Like, I didn't tell her about any of this until we were well into our marriage at that point. And I was like, she needed a mass. She grew up like a normal Christian home. She didn't have any of this stuff, you guys. She had a very like typical, like normal life, Christian lifestyle. And then she marries this guy that's just completely filled with this crazy other world, So she had like a lot of deprogramming to do. You get raised in a very weak, soft version of Christianity by and far. And so her understanding of her authority and her ability to engage the demonic and engage in spiritual warfare was very weak at the time. And so like it took a long time for training and gearing ourselves up. But we started going on walks in our neighborhood, because this neighborhood that we lived in is called Westminster, Colorado. And this place is called Countryside. And in that neighborhood, there was these people that kept trying to kidnap women around this lake that we lived by. And we knew that there was some major occult activity that was taking place in there, because we were finding these signs and symbols. If you guys haven't investigated like why these cults and these groups and use signs and symbols to communicate, but it's like the better way to view all of this, you guys, is like an organized crime. Like that's really how this operates. They operate similar to an organized crime family or an organized crime syndicate. And they will use different colored light bulbs in their porches to communicate different things and different messages to each other. They will drop USB drives of child porn and stuff inside their mailboxes. And that's like one of their main ways of trafficking around this information. So we just started like walking around and praying. Like it's called like prayer mapping. It's like a way of doing it, where you're starting to identify and asking the Father to begin to reveal the fruits of what's been going on in these different areas, because we had a whole lot of poltergeist activity in our house. And we began to realize, we're like, okay, we are sitting in the heart of darkness. Like the reason on one side I was scared to come out against my family is because I was still living at a physical address. Like I had prepared all my life to just escape and evade and disappear solo. I didn't have known addresses. I had aliases and all this other stuff. Well, now I've got a physical place I got to stay and live and endure. And I think so much of my training at that time with the Father was learning how to stand and fight. There's a reason that you read the book of Ephesians, he's saying over and over and over again, stand, therefore, having your loins girded. Like most people just don't know how to physically stand on their feet and endure suffering, to endure that. But it literally says Yeshua learned obedience through his suffering. And we were suffering a lot of sleepless nights. We were suffering a lot of demonic attacks in there, with stuff flying around a room, like our fan turning on and off, lights turning off, just all of that, just creepy stuff that's designed to just wear you out and cause that fear, because the enemy just feeds on these parasitic dark energies, these dark emotions that we manifest when we're in those trauma states. And so we just started being like, you know what, we're going to take our authority and start to map out where these people live, how do they operate. And there was this guy we called the warlock of Countryside, because in his backyard, when you drive by his backyard, you could see into it. And he had put up statues of all these deities, all of these Greek and Roman gods and goddesses all over. I mean, hundreds of them, like big ones and small ones, just covered it. And it was all over the course of like a year and a half, 2 years that he started doing this and putting all out in the public, in the open. And he started putting up all these portals where like literally a portal, like you would think of like a big gate that you'd set up with all these LED lights that would turn on different dates and at different times with different frequencies. And we are like, oh man, this guy is all in on this. You know, when somebody advertises it, like I went to the post office today and I saw a guy with a Masonic ring on, like there's like a cheerleader. He's an advertiser for the cult. You know, he's not going to be the same level of adept at somebody that's initiated to these higher levels, but he's a cheerleader. That's like the frontline recruiter, you would say. Well, this guy on one side is recruiting very openly and broadly. However, he was seriously, deeply trained, and he had serpents all over the front of his yard. And so my wife and I, what we started doing is we started praying for that man. And we started also interceding that the Father would forgive the sins, that it empowered him, that he would forgive the sins and break his occult power to the highest level, making it impossible for him to be used by the kingdom of darkness to harm anyone. Because in this neighborhood, y'all, what ended up taking place there is that a girl named Jessica Ridgway, this is like the first video on my YouTube channel. It's a documentary I did talking about this, but very public case. It was the most investigated case in interstate agencies brought in to investigate this. But she went missing one day, and she was about 9 years old. She was like an elementary school girl, little blonde haired girl, and she got taken. And what happened is this cult took this girl and they butchered her and ritually sacrificed her and cut her body into pieces and stuffed her in different places. They put her in one person's house, and then they dismembered her and took her down to these tunnels, which are on like the devil's backbone. There's in Colorado, the Front Range, there is just honeycombed with mines and tunnels all over the place. And some of them are old military stuff. Some of it is old mining tunnels. And then on another side of it, these have literally been taken over by these satanic cults or by these, satanic, just as a general broad term here. They these cults, and what they did is they took her torso and they left it outside of this area, the Hogback, which has these deep tunnels that go into what used to be a coal mine that they now store natural gas and top secret paperwork. And so they left her body there. She ended up getting found, and they brought in a satanic crimes expert over the course of this investigation. They brought in all of these people. And when they brought in the satanic crimes experts, because they discovered this cross with these satanic sigils all over it. And as soon as they publicized that they were investigating this as a satanic coven, they had a fall guy step forward, a 17-year-old who came in, and they placed all the blame on him and wrapped up the whole scenario. But we had been mapping out this cult, y'all, for almost a year prior to this incident. And so we knew where a lot of this was taking place. Like one of these houses, they have a cage, a literal cage that goes from the driveway back into a building, into their hillside. And then they have sensors and altars going all up to the top of this hill on this property. And they have butterflies lining the entire cage. Butterflies are very important terms in use of mind control to trigger somebody to go into this hypnotic state. And they literally have this cage, like an apiary used for birds, so that people could be brought in from their car and then shoved in the cage and go all the way back into this chamber in the hillside. Like this neighborhood was so saturated with it. And so like my wife and I began to really pray constantly that the Father would give us an opportunity to have a showdown with this guy. Because at the end of the day, y'all, like we are supposed to hunt the souls of men, like, and if somebody is going to be that bold and that direct so as to be repping their kingdom of darkness so heavily, like we need to try to recruit these people. On one side, we want them to come out and confess their crimes and be transparent so they can have healing and deliverance. But on the other side, like I'm looking to recruit double agents all the time. Like I look at these people as like my worst enemies can become like Saul any day of the week. And they are dedicated to their cause. Like I like guys who are branded Satanists, like guys who have the sigil of Lucifer on their face. Like these are the people to me that are diehard zealots. I want them on the kingdom of heaven. Like you want to recruit those guys. And so we started praying very diligently that we would get an opportunity to do so. And I felt this day that it was like my confirmation that I could go there. And so I started walking towards his house. And I kid you not, as I'm walking to his house, the sky that gone from total blue within the course of 2 blocks turned absolutely dark, like super intense gusts of wind, like dark black clouds, and incredible cold. Like a deep penetrating cold came out of the sky. And I was like, this is the type of the prince of the power of the air that like you literally start wrestling with when you think you're going on a walk to talk to somebody. You are wrestling with powers and thrones. And like, as I was walking there, like I rolled my ankle so severely that I was crying on the side of the road, just wailing, and I was crawling, like pulling myself forward. Like, I have got to get there no matter what it takes. I am going to get to this man's house. And I literally stumbled my way to his front door, and he has this big dragon going up and down in his driveway there. And I knock on his door, and I ask him about his art. I'd ask him about his yard art. I'm like, you seem to be a really passionate person about all this stuff. Would you just tell me more about what this all is here? And he's like, I would love to. And he's this old guy, right? Like, maybe not old guy. He's like in his 60s, but he's just looks like a normal dude. These people don't look like big, scary guys. You know what I'm saying? Like, their camouflage is middle America. Like, that literally is the place where the vast majority of them operate from. They don't operate from their big, beautiful estates with scary, clean houses and guards. And they don't look like Tom Cruise in that movie, Eyes Wide Shut. That's not how it looks. It's like a bunch of gross perverts hanging out, doing disgusting things so they can do it again later. They don't look like the elite. Okay. And this guy he tells me he's going to take me on a tour of his house. All right. Y'all, he opens his garage door, and I kid you not, it is a checkerboard floor, black and white checkerboard floor, and then a pyramid of skulls. Okay. In his it's like he's converted into almost a living room, but he has an altar there, a shrine of all of these skulls, animal, human looking skulls, and then these hybrid, like, goat head horned god skull at the top of it. Okay. And he could not be more proud of this. Like, this is why, like, when I go to, like, when you engage these people, we ask that the Father would bind any lying spirits, and that they would be compelled to tell the truth, that they would feel like the need to tell the truth and reveal what's going on inside them, because a lot of them inherently are still a person in there. They're still like a child in there, that wants freedom, that needs freedom. And we ask that kind of comes forth. And in his garage, he has this child having sex with an angel, like a fallen angel with a serpentine thing, like a big statue of this, like it's like his shrine. He takes me around his property, and he begins to describe all of these gods and these deities, and he tells me their names all in like Greek. And I explained to him, like, his favorite statue is Lucifer. And when I said that name as opposed to the Greek god that he knew it by, I mean, he started shaking uncontrollably and bouncing off the side of his house, like Tourette's. And he kept denying that that's not who he worships. I don't worship Lucifer. I don't worship Lucifer, And he took me inside, and he began to show me all of his little shrines that were in his house as well. And I began to ask him, like, when did all this start? Like, where did this come in? And he started using heavy drugs. Like, he was like a chemical engineer. He made a lot of money as a successful, like, engineer, but he started using a lot of drugs. And he said these things began to communicate to him and began to give him information. And he wanted to become rich. And he said, I'll do whatever you want. Just show me how to get rich. And so he said they started giving him downloads to build little devices that he could sell so that he could get wealthy from this stuff. And then he felt compelled to decorate his yard with these things to begin to practice this magic. And I think, like, that's how it started for him. And then what happens is he began to build this cult around him, and people began to work with him. And so it's not, I think there's a misunderstanding for a lot of folks about how people get started in this, because I was born into a generational style of this, an old religion, but there's people that get brought into this every day of the week because they're dabbling with the demonic. They're picking up stuff that they have no idea the power that it has. A lot of people are into trying these different drugs, these hallucinatory drugs, and ayahuasca, and these spirit molecules, and DMT and LSD, and they have no idea what happens when you start to pick up a phone book and open up realms and start talking to other deities, that you are dealing with some of the most powerful psychological manipulators that have ever been. And they are custom catered to be chameleons, to lead you astray, to hijack you and turn you into their prison baby, do whatever they want, their slave. And so, like, that was like an experience that we had just in our normal adult life, of how easy somebody can go from a normal life to complete perversity. And like, his whole thing he became obsessed with was having affairs with married women. That was like his whole entire life pursuit became that. And he ended up making hundreds of thousands of dollars doing this whole other, ever since he brought these deities into his life. He got wealthy through it, and he got his lust fulfilled, but he could not stop. He was absolutely consumed by these things.
So how did that whole encounter end? Like, when you said goodbye, like, I can't believe he just opened up his house.
He wanted to take me on a drive in his Tesla. He And so, which was quite a moment. You know, you're like, do you get in the car with a warlock or not? You know, but I really, in the car is kind of when I think there was a moment of clarity for him where you could see this bondage on him, where like the kind of like he was so proud and so like upbeat and like high inside his house. But when he got in his car and we started driving around, like a part of him broke out of it, you know, and talked about like the loneliness and this kind of sorrow that he had, you know. And he took me to the lake, like where these women were being kidnapped and stuff. And he told me that he slings stones into this lake, you know, and he cast these stones into there, and like all of that other level of darkness seemed to come off of him for a moment. And he had this like this desire to have peace, and yet at the same time, like he was not willing to surrender to deliverance in order to get it. Like he was still too bound up. And like on one side of it, when you guys get into spiritual warfare, you're also not to just go cast demons out of people because you think that's the right thing to do. Because if you cast out demons out of somebody that doesn't want it, they go back and get back into it. 7 worse demons are going to come upon these people. They'll be worse off. And so like, I don't just go lay hands on people hastily, you know what I mean? And I understand that a lot of it is like a fencing game. You're looking for opportunities to be able to build into it, but he's still there and active, and that cult is still there and active in that neighborhood.
Wow, dude, that's crazy, man. What a story, dude. Thank you for sharing that with us. You know, in your book, Snatched from the Flames, you told a story. I don't know if you would want to reiterate that story here, but I know that you said that you felt like, you know, there were people after you for periods of your life, and you know, you were worried about being killed. And you told a story about you and your wife had interaction with some people that you felt were stalking you to kill you, and there was like a gun malfunction. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so after my wife got pregnant with my daughter, I had a choice to make, which was to either totally come out of it or not, you know. And I ended up going and seeking deliverance down at a conference in Dallas. A chapter called Deliverance in Dallas there in the book talks about that. And a man named Tom Dunn, who was working on a film documentary called Detestable. Man, if you guys should have a guest on your show, Tom Dunn would rock, man. He is fantastic. And I highly recommend him. I'll try to connect you guys later on as well. But his film Detestable is absolutely critical on covering the topic as well. But it was during the course of that time, I talked to my wife and told her kind of what had happened to me and what was going on with me. And one of the things that I ended up doing was going back to my mom and trying to talk to her about getting my genealogy. I got proofed in my heraldry back when I was 13 years old, which is to give you a right to the throne in a sense, and to be able to have access to a different level of power. And so I wanted all those records. And after I asked her for that, you know, like the following week, my wife and I went to a movie, and when we were walking out of the theater, there was this just overwhelming sense of death in the air. And for those of y'all that have never been around like life and death situations on a regular basis, if you've never had a familiar spirit with death and you've never been involved in killing, like there's a very distinct spiritual atmosphere that takes place when murderous intent comes in to the room. And I literally believe these are the demons of murder and rage and hatred that accompany people that have that upon them. And as we began to step out into the parking lot, it was a very large parking lot, and there was only a few cars parked there, mine and 2 others that were like in this large area. And all of a sudden, a car began to come from our right at like a 1 o'clock position and driving diagonally across all of the lines, but straight at us. And my wife was like almost 7 months pregnant at the time. And I mean, I was prepared for war. I was wearing body armor, carrying pistol, like, I mean, I was prepared for war all the time at that point in my life. I didn't ever turn it off. You know, I knew it was an inevitability that stuff was going to go down. And I just began to pray, you know, like deliver us, you know. And these people came forward, and it was a man and a woman, and the woman had a pistol in her hand, and she raised that pistol up towards us to fire at us. And as soon as she did so, like it jammed in her hand, and she like dropped it back down and was dropping the magazine and trying to chamber it and trying to clear the malfunction and bring it back up. And I just began to run with my wife around the vehicle that was there closest to us and put that between us and the car. And then they kind of drove past us, and the woman was like shaking, trying to reload this thing and frantically shaking. And as they drove past us, I was like, we just need to get to our car and get out of here as fast as we can. And so we ran towards our vehicle, and then a truck came by with a guy that was in the back of the truck, the bed of the truck, who raised up with a firearm to try to shoot us as well. And his weapon jammed and malfunctioned in front of my face. And this was like one of those just like slowing down moments of your life, because I'm thinking in my head that I'm going to have to fight. Like I'm so hardwired to fight back, to engage, but I knew, like, screaming, yelling in my head, just run, just leave. That's all we had to do, was leave. And like, I got my wife in the car, and I got in the car, and we began to drive away. And as we went and took that same route that the previous car had come from, there was a man who was running on foot, and he came in front of our vehicle, and he had, as distinct as day, man, a Glock pistol in his hand. Like, he could have turned and fired at us. There was nothing that was stopping him, but he had this look in his face, this absolute dread, like he was staring at his worst nightmare. Like, all the blood had drained out of his face, his eyes pinned, like just terrified, staring at us as we were coming towards him. And he just turned and ran away from us. And I got to experience in that moment what it was like and what could happen when we really do rely on our creator, like El Shaddai, man, like Yahuwah Elohim Sevoth, like the Lord of hosts. Like, he really does command his angels concerning you. Like, it's a real thing. He will bear you up so your foot doesn't strike a stone. Like, 1,000 can fall on your side and 10,000 at your right hand, and it does not come near you. It's an absolute reality that's still applicable to this day. And like, that was a trained team of assassins that should have every day of the week been able to eliminate us and kill us. And you know what? The Father showed me that I didn't have to physically fight with the carnal weapons that I had, but I had to learn how to rely upon him, to like learn to walk in holiness, to learn to walk a life in set apartness, to where I relied upon him, and he would grow in me. And over the year, this is now, for you guys that are listening to this now, man, this is 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago this is 7 years ago that all this took place over the summer. And I have had so many different experiences of when they have sent people to try to kill my family or poison us or kill us and use drone. I mean, we have had so many experiences over the years of persecution and overt attempts of assassination. And I have seen deliverance in the most miraculous and powerful ways every single time. And I really believe that is, like, he has preserved our life to be a living witness, to be a living stone of testimony, to call people out of the darkness and into the light, to get them out of the power of Satan and into the transfer them into the kingdom of God. Like, this is what man needs today. We need to understand that he still moves and operates like this. And no matter what, like, yeah, we're talking about a lot of the big, bad, scary side of this, but you must understand that he outnumbers the kingdom of darkness mightily. And at his word, like, the nations still shudder. They still do fear him. And you must understand something. The adversary, the devil, that, like, he reveres Yahuwah. He fears him. These demons fear him. They really do. And it's only mankind that has so been lulled into a slumber that does not revere his name anymore. But you know what? He still will be made. He will never be mocked, and he will not take it lightly. And when we put our faith and our hope and our trust in him, he will show himself to be faithful.
Amen to that, man. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, I've definitely had some close calls in my life, and God has saved me from some pretty horrible situations. So I can attest to, maybe not on the same level as you, but I think that's also pretty prevalent in today's society as well, is this thing of fear, and how demons feast on fear. And I mean, fear was at an all-time high, right? With the pandemic, and I think that it gave a lot of these demonic spirits power, right? Because so many people were filled with fear and anxiety. I mean, I still see people now walking around, with and wearing gloves, and my heart always breaks when I see these people, because I'm like, to live and walk around with that level of fear is just so ungodly to me. You know what I mean? And I always secretly pray for these people in my head. But that's what we need to learn to gain control of our fears and conquer them. And what I've really learned to do, and I've really been focusing on this recently, is even when you're going through hard times or presented with difficult situations, you remain gracious and grateful through the whole thing. And it really is a matter of perspective, right? And it's like choosing to see Like one of my friends told me, a friend of the podcast said, you're silver, but God's trying to refine you to gold, and we have to go through the fire to be refined. And so I just know that all these things that we go through, all these experiences that we go through, they're just learning experiences. And when you get through them, it's really more power to your testimony for God, right? And his magnificence and how glorious he is and the things that he can preserve us through.
You absolutely got that right. There's a reason he's commanding us, forbidding us from fearing men and fearing death, because when you do, you're the you're being fed on by those parasites. And fear is supposed to be upon our enemies. He said, like, when a man's ways are pleasing before him, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Like when we are walking in his ways, he says, I will put the dread of you on your enemies. But if our ways are displeasing to him, he's going to put the fear of them on us, the dread on us. Like Jonathan, I never forget those stories. Like early on, on one side of it, my family, my direct biological family, instilled in me also a hunger for the word early on. I did see my father, as flawed as he was, he had a discipline for reading his scriptures in the morning, and it impressed upon me like the disciplines of a godly man in that regard. And I had this insatiable hunger for the word because I heard these stories, but I saw, to me, such a passive, sissy version of Christianity on the pulpit. When I would go to church, I would see such a weak man. I'm not talking about his physical characteristics. I'm talking about his lack of basic discernment. Like when you go from church to church with a predator sitting next to you time and time again, it starts to wear on you this thought that these God that these people talk about versus the man that is actually sitting in front of me are not the same thing even remotely, because they can't even see the predator in their midst. They can't even see the wolf in sheep's clothing that's sitting right here in front of them, because they a lot of times are blinded by the bribe. They're blinded by the tithe check that's sitting in front of them, and it created me this need to know the word for myself because I saw hypocrisy there. I knew that the word could be trusted. And so the first thing I could do when I could read, man, I was reading 1st and 2nd Samuel. I wanted to know what David was all like. What made David David? Why was he so distinctly different in that valley of all of the warriors of Israel? Why is he the one who rises up? Why is he the warrior when everyone else is the coward, And it takes me back to that story in Jonathan where all of Israel is sitting there full of fear. The dread of the Philistines was on the Israelites. And yet Jonathan had this covenantal understanding of the authority that he had. And he took his armor bearer up, and they literally says this line that he says, the battle is not won by strength of arms, but the battle is by Yahuwah. Like he is the one who determines victory. And this is an absolute reality. If you know with confidence you are serving in the King of Kings kingdom, you are an ambassador. You are a champion of champions. You are set here on this earth to bring victory for his kingdom, to literally take back the kingdom of to drive back the kingdom of darkness and take captivity captive. Like he said, greater works that I have done on this earth, you're going to do. We are supposed to be walking in those works. And when we see men specifically boldly standing up and having nothing to do with the kingdom of compromise, it infects the world with truth. It infects the world with courage, which is far more contagious than fear. It's far more contagious than any level of doctrines of demons will ever be, because the man that he has set eternity in our hearts. Mankind is desperate for the deliverance. Mankind is desperate for the answers. And they have been fed such a perpetual stream of lies, of falsehood, that they are desperate for the truth. And you know what they're seeing now in this age of artificial reality? They're looking for authentic men of righteousness. They're looking for warriors, and they're not looking for men who have compromised for something so easy as a dollar bill or as a job. They're looking for men who are willing to sacrifice everything for the sakes of the truth that they have. And when we do that, I'm telling you, it inspired all the men of Israel to turn around and attack the Philistines. When David rose up and he killed one giant, he cuts his head off with his own sword. The entire nation of Israel's soldiers are filled with courage. Every one of them. That's the power of multiplication. And this is why I'm out here trying to call to these people, because I understand there is a lot of the best soldiers in the kingdom of righteousness trapped behind enemy lines. And we are supposed to light beacons of hope for them so that they can see there's men of conviction still standing here who will fight for them, who will lay down their lives for them, who will give up everything for them to know the truth.
Amen, man. You're getting me fired up now. Exactly. I think we got to be willing to lay it all on the line. And like you said, don't compromise for material objects, for money, for clout amongst men, for favor. We just seek God's favor in everything. And we got to be willing, man, to go to prison, or whatever it is that comes down the pipeline that we need to face. We need to understand that we have a higher calling, and we can't allow that fear to creep into our head. We gotta get the job done by any and all means. And if it means laying down your life for your brother or sister, well, I guess that's what we got to do. I mean, I can sit here and say this, but obviously when you're face to face with that situation, how are you going to react? But I try to always think about these things and say, like, I have no fear because I know that I'm bought and paid for, and I know where I'm going to spend my eternal life. And, I'm here for a mission, and we got to be willing to lay it down all on the line and know that we're going to be taken care of. And I think that's why you have such a powerful story, and why God's preserved you through all this craziness. And you're still here to talk about it today, and these are the kind of things that, like you said, men of God, they need to hear these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nathan, I had a quick question for you about some of the resources to help educate us. Like what are some of the best resources that you could recommend, other than your book? Obviously your book is fantastic, but yeah, if you can fill me in. I love reading, and I do not want to be one of those ignorant people.
Well, that's awesome. I have on my website, snatchedfromtheflames.com, I have a resources tab, and in there I have recommended reading. And I probably have about 250 different recommended reads on everything from spiritual warfare stuff we're talking about tonight, to regenerative agriculture, to biodynamic farming, and the history of the world, the occult side of all of this, and study tools, resources, ancient languages. I got really passionate about studying ancient Paleo Hebrew, and so I've got all kinds of things over there. My wife and I spent the last 4.5 years traveling full time on the road in an RV, and we went to homesteads and farms, and we learned all kinds of skills and trades, from foraging and natural living and health, and all of these ancient ways that I realized I had this desire to go live on a homestead with my family, but I knew we'd probably die if I tried that, because you can't learn it too much from YouTube. To an extent you can, but some of my favorite recommended reads that I'm always like trying to encourage people about is I'll say this, well, I guess we can show it here, but Illuminati Unmasked by Johnny Cerrucci. Johnny Cerrucci's got he's got his website Resistance Rising and johnnycerrucci.com, but he's got quite a few different books on there. Illuminati Unmasked, everything you need to know about the New World Order and how we will beat it, is one of my absolute recommended reads. He has another one that's called The Pedocracy Exposed: How Access to Power is Granted Through Rape, Incest, and Torture of Children. That is absolutely, I know it's brutal, man, but it is one of the best historical examinations of a lot of the topics of what we're talking about here tonight. And he's more of a historian that does a really good job going through the entirety of that. Oh, another one from a Canadian here, like one of the best spies in the world. I'll tell you this, Carl Tykereb. Man, if you get this guy on your show, I'm telling you, it'll change the world. Carl Tykereb. I love Canadians, y'all. One of my favorite, the most hospitable people I've ever met are Afghanis and Canadians. I'll tell you, they're just so genteel and kind, and I just love them. But Carl Tykereb, he wrote this book that's called Game of Gods: The Temple of Man in the Age of Reenchantment, and this is one of my just favorite I love history, and this one, he examines a lot of how did we get to this like pantheistic, humanistic culture of kind of this new age ideology. Why are they resurrecting these old gods, these ancient pagan ways? And so he infiltrated a lot of like the World Economic Forum style of like global citizenship conferences, and a lot of these like all of these occult workings that are just much more mainstream. He goes to Burning Man every year. They set up a tent that's called the Temple to the Unknown God, and they minister to people out there. And he's just like a diehard apologist in a unique and profound way. But he's got some incredible stories of being able to explain what it really looks like ground up, on a lot of this. Those are some of my like favorite reads. Another series that I highly recommend is by Dr. Michael Lake, which is called the Shinar Directive. And he's much more of like a scholar. If you guys are wanting to understand a bit more of like some of the history of the topics that we were talking about, and where did like this ideology and this bloodline belief system for raising up the old gods come from, with he's a fantastic historian in that regards of it, and a pastor who turned into a seminary, president of a seminary, who then his wife had a background like mine, and the occult began to come after them and send witches after them. I mean, they were in the Ozarks as well, and their whole world turned inside out, and a lot of his theology turned inside out, and he realized he had no idea what the heck he was getting into. So him and his wife are one of my absolute favorite recommended references in kingdomintelligencebriefing.com. They are phenomenal. But dude, I could talk all day books, bro. I love books.
Me too.
Yeah, you and Alex will get along very well. And Alex is probably going to go read every book that you just mentioned. I definitely want to check into the some of that subject matter, though. Definitely highly intriguing. I was going to ask you before we wind this down and the podcast, because we've been running about an hour and a half now. But I did want to ask you. So when did you get saved? Like legit get saved, where you were like,
yeah, man.
Were you saved as a child, or did you have to renew your faith as an adult, or?
Well, yes and yes, for sure.
Point?
I had to renew my faith many times in my life. I'll tell you that much. But I first had I finally had a powerful encounter with Jesus Christ as I knew him then when I was 7 years old, and I was sitting on my couch at my parents' house, and they turned on the TV, which was a super rare thing back then. We had this like 30 minutes of TV rule, if at all. And anyways, they turned this on, and there was this show going on in an arena, and there was this team called the Power Team. And it was a bunch of these like yoked out buff bros who were standing.
Those dudes came to my school. Those guys came to my school in middle school, and they were like ripping phone books and stuff. Yeah.
Bro, those were the men. Those were the Gibberim, that's like the Hebrew word for mighty men of valor you read about in the scriptures, like, dude, those guys would tear lions in half, I was like, these are the mighty men, like they're real, and they were doing, like you said, they do all these like strongman feats, like bending rebar, tearing license plates. Like they're just like, dude, they're just awesome. You're like, oh, like I just thought they were the coolest guys ever. And they started talking about, if you're like, you think we're strong men because we can do all these things, you know what? We are not. We are weak men, but we have been strong in Jesus Christ. And if you want to be strong in Jesus Christ, you cry out to him. You call upon his name. You believe on him, and he will save you. And I was like, I want that. I want that power in me. Like I want to be like that. And that was my first time I ever really called out to him, like with the sincerity of belief that he was mighty. I had to know the Messiah was mighty, that he wasn't some neutered, naked, dying guy on a cross. Like I hate that image of him. That is the satanic, seditious image of him.
Yep.
He is literally in the scriptures called El Gibor, the mighty one. You know what I'm talking about? Like the one who can hold the world together by his words. This is like not somebody to be trifled with. Like he is the master of meekness, and that's power under constraint. Like that is literally the most powerful man in the room who doesn't ever have to show it. That is a total, like he came camouflaged when he first came. But when you read the book of Revelation, it's called the revelation of the Messiah. I am telling you, that is who he is. Eyes of fire. Like there is indistinguishable character attributes about him that I had definitely not been given when I was young, but I came to know him because I saw men being men. And it really gave me a desire to walk in his kingdom and to have that power in me so that I could overcome the monsters in the night. I wanted to be able to resist the devil. I wanted to be able to do that. And I understood I needed to call upon someone that was so much mightier than anything I could comprehend. So that was when I first gave my life to him. But it really, over the course of my life, I had many wayward trips in and out of my relationship with him. But he ultimately brought me to a place. You're going to read about it soon in the book of where I was dying and dead nearly on the outside of my parents' basement. And I got to see him rebuke death and save my life and show me the power of his authority over death himself. And I committed myself to following him. And you know what? There's been times where I slipped far, far away from that, but I went and immersed myself, confessed my sins again, man, and immersed myself again and got back up and got renewed by his Holy Spirit, his Ruach HaKodesh, to go and be bold and mighty again. And anytime that we have that, the righteous man falls 7 times, you know, the one characteristic about us is we get up, we keep fighting, we get back on our feet, and we stand. We're going to lose if we fall on our backs. We're going to lose if we stay on the ground game, man. They're going to kill us with the ground game. It says the enemy goes to wear out the saints. That's it. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. It's the Fabian Socialist Society. It's wolves in sheep's clothing that are just wearing us out, you know. But you know what? We are told to stand up, gird up the loins of our mind, and get back in the fight.
Yeah, we don't stay down on the canvas, man. We keep getting back up, dusting ourselves off, you know. And even when we do, you know, make mistakes, we confess them, and we don't let it hold us back from the mission at hand. I think that's very important, because I know I'm guilty of that, you know. I'm not worthy, you know, like, who am I? And when those thoughts come into your head, you need to learn to rebuke them.
Absolutely.
Because God chooses us. He doesn't say, get right, get clean, get pretty, and now you can be in my family. He chose us when we were filthy, absolutely filthy, and he's doing the purification process, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. Well, you know, it's been a tremendous time, man. I love having you on as a guest. I would even like to bring you back on in the future and get into some more of this stuff, and just hear some more of your knowledge that you have, because I know you have a lot of knowledge, especially on, you know, like the Illuminati. And we have been having a lot of listeners that want us to talk about that, because we've done some polls, and one of the subjects that they wanted us to cover is that subject matter. So I wouldn't mind bringing you back, because I think you're an authority on the subject.
Oh man, hey, have Johnny Cerrucci on. He is a much more authority in a lot of ways in that regard. I'm telling you. I just recommended referrals here, brother. There's some guys who swing way above my weight class when it comes to their level of specificity with this. I have a lot of firsthand blood and guts experience on what these people are and what they believe, but then there's some others that have done a lot of good diligence in putting in the paperwork time too.
Yeah, I was going to say one of my big takeaways is I just it's amazing the stuff that you actually had to go through, and people like me, like normal people. And I mean, I've been doing this Firmamental with Rebel for a while, and nothing surprises me anymore. But one of the big takeaways is we live in a really evil world, and all these people that are denying the fact that these things happen are not actually doing this realm any favors. Like, we need to wake up, we need to not be ignorant, and we can be a lot more strong and dangerous to the bad guy side by being informed good guys. So I learned so much from you tonight, so I just wanted to say thanks for that.
Welcome, man. Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. And you heard it here, folks. That's Nathan Reynolds. Let them know one more time where they can find you.
Yeah, they can go to snatchedfromtheflames.com. You can email me at snatchedfromtheflames@protonmail.com. Also, youtube.com/Nathan Reynolds. I'm on TikTok at Snatched from the Flames, and Rumble at the LinenRailroad.
Nice. I'm going to definitely go give your channels a follow. And thank you for joining us. And you heard it here, Firmamentalist Nathan Reynolds. Great episode, great time. Thank you, sir. And remember, guys, protect your domes, and we'll see you next time. Peace.